confined to, our research oftentimes remains confined to bulky reports seen only by ourselves and at best our donors, or maybe a few peer organizations, but it largely remains outside the frame of reference for the policymakers or the people working on the ground or the community with whom the research has engaged. Thus, there seems to be a sort of one-way communication whereby the stories, the journeys, the issues and challenges of communities and people working on the ground, uh, who are shared with us, but they remain confined to us or within a very limited circle. So this also limits the possibility of effecting change at either the policy level or at the level of intervention and implementation. However, the issue is not just that of bulky reports. The issue is about the very mode of communication, the design of our research products. Can we break out of this box of word-heavy documents for reports and peer-reviewed publications to explore new ways of communicating our analysis and findings so that it reaches wider and deeper and translates into active advocacy for change? So there are three dimensions here. One, it is about communicating with the government. Two, communicating with the community with whom we are conducting research. And three, communicating with peer organizations and other activist groups who are working on similar issues. Our experience of advocacy work with policymakers, global, national, and subnational, tell us that our research itself, and not just its communication, needs to focus on solutions and point towards corrections or changes in existing systems and structures. So it's not enough to critique. It is important to say what to change and how to change. Now, sometimes the how to change evolves not only through our own understanding and analysis, as well as advocacy work, but also through the work of other peer organizations, activists, and this therefore needs to receive serious attention in terms of sharing of evidence. How do we build on each other's work, and how do we actually, share each other's learnings to communicate better and more effectively? Further, another very critical component of evidence sharing is the community itself. In fact, principles of participatory feminist research also points to the criticality of not only communicating back to the community, but engaging the community at every step of the research process. In that sense, evidence becomes a dynamic and evolving process, which itself carries the potential for change and addresses not only the problem, but the possible solutions. Today's roundtable will therefore look into all these dimensions and bring out the rich experiences of evidence building and communication at all these levels. We have a stellar panel today, and I will request all my panelists to please turn on their videos so that we may introduce you to all our participants and everybody who's come here to the program. We have with us, first of all, Priya Nanda, who is a Senior Program Officer with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation at the India Country Office. And she's part of the Measurement, Learning and Evaluation team, where she leads a portfolio of research on health system strengthening and family planning, with a focus on gender, social norms, and equity. Prior to joining the foundation, she was the Director of Social and Economic Development Group for ICRW, our own organization. So she's very much a part of the ICRW family. And she was here with us for, in fact, 10 years, from 2006 to 2016. Welcome, Priya. We are really happy to have you with us. We also have with us Sonia Tanaka. Sonia is an expert in global health policy and strategy. Her work focuses on articulating organizational policy positions, strategies, and engagement in global governance processes. She played a key role in the development of UNAIDS global strategies, UNAIDS contributions to the 2011 and 2016 UN General Assembly political declarations on AIDS, and its positions in Agenda 2030. We also have with us Yogesh Vaishnav. Yogesh is one of the founding members of the Vikalp Sansthan, which is a non-profit organization founded in 2003 in Rajasthan, India. This organization works towards ending gender-based violence and creating equal society for all, and mainly engages with youth in this endeavor. He has been involved in various activities such as participatory training, module and resource material development, media and communication, documentation, advocacy, lobbying, networking, monitoring, evaluation, etc. And is the National Committee member of We Can End All Violence Against Women campaign launched by Oxfam. Currently, he's also co-chairing the Forum to Engage Men India, FEM India. So welcome, Yogesh. We are really happy to have you with us. We also have Sejal Dant. So Sejal is a founder member of Anandi, which is the Area Networking and Development Initiative, and currently serves as its executive director. So Anandi, as many of us know, is a feminist organization working in Gujarat since 1995. She also serves as a member of the CSAG to the UN Women Office for India, Bhutan, Sri Lanka, and Maldives, and is a gender technical resource person to several state government programs and organizations in India. She has been actively engaged in the national steering groups of Right to Food campaign and Women Farmers Alliance. We also have several colleagues from ICRW today with us to share their experiences of their work on the ground and the intensive research and advocacy that they have carried out at different levels. We have with us Pranita Achyut, who is currently our Director of Research and Programs at ICRW Asia office. She has been working extensively in different areas of applied research and program monitoring, particularly in gender-based violence, adolescent health, and family planning. She has led flagship programs of ICRW, including Gender Equity Movement in Schools, the GEMS program, and promoting adolescent engagement, knowledge, and health, the PUNK program. We also have with us Dalia. Dalia Sebastian is a technical specialist for ICRW at the Asia Regional Office. In this role, she has been providing technical support in research and evaluation on projects in the areas of violence and gender issues. She brings several years of experience of impact evaluation studies and working with a wide range of donors and partners on issues such as population, aging, gender violence, and HIV. We also have with us uh, uh, Kuhika Seth. Kuhika is working as a technical specialist at ICRW, and her work is primarily around engaging men in sexual and reproductive health and family planning. Her prior work was in the evaluation programs on health messaging through SAGs with Population Council and on health systems research with Sambodhi. Uh, Finally, we have with us Sneha. Uh, uh, so Sneha works as a senior research and program associate across multiple projects and domains. She has been trained in conducting gender transformative research and evaluation and is currently working on the COVID-19 sex disaggregated data and health policy tracker. Her past work also includes several adolescent empowerment projects, notably the Learning Review on what works for adolescents empowerment, which aimed at drawing out strategic learnings from a decade of programming for adolescents. So we have with us a very stellar panel, and I would actually want to begin the whole discussion by inviting Priya Nanda to share some of her thoughts on the overall topic, and then I will move to each one of the speakers and ask them to reflect on a certain sub-theme that we have sort of thought about. And I'll also request our other participants to please put in their questions and their comments in the chat box. And we will come to it at the end of the first round of discussion. And thank you so much, everybody, once again for coming. And over to you, Priya. Thank you.
Great. Well, thank you, Nilanjana, to invite me. And I apologize about going first because I have to drop out a little early. I would have actually liked to hear the co-panelists before I came in. I think some reflections as somebody who's contributed to being in the process of creation of evidence for a long time to somebody now perhaps enabling and facilitating use. I consciously use this word because I think that what happens often is if you look at evidence as the universe of researchers, as that this is where it begins, the journey of evidence creation begins, and we are already falling short of our imagination of where influence lies. So I think the first thing I want to say is that I think we should imagine evidence as a journey or a value chain of evidence that may be created somewhere right in the middle of the journey, but we have to conceptualize an imagination, its need and demand and influence for the user who may be way ahead as either a policymaker at one end of a spectrum or a community or a grassroots group at another end of the spectrum. So, users can be those who are using evidence to actively advocate, and they may take on sometimes external, adversarial, confrontational positions. They may take on very facilitative, more embedded positions, depending on the context and what the issue may be, and where, and how much advocacy or history of that has happened before. And on the other end of the spectrum is a policymaker who may or may not be very removed from the reality that you're trying to explore. Because sometimes the policymaker is not necessarily removed, they just feign ignorance of issues that are very important and critical, and they may challenge that there's not enough evidence or this is not the right evidence. At either end of the spectrum, the people or the bodies or who are creating evidence has to really bring in both sides of the spectrum into their mental map or model, and really see what does the user need, what are their challenges, what are their questions, and how do we then create evidence with that need in mind. So I think more effective dialogue at both ends is really important, more effective understanding. And so the evidence is not just created out of gaps that have come out of systematic reviews of previous evidence, but it's created out of that engagement either with grassroots groups or with policymakers. And I think organizations like ICRW have played both sides of that evidence creation, where you work actively with grassroots organizations or engagement with policymakers, program planners and designers. So I think that's a very important point that I wanted to make. The second is just coming from there is the issue of being embedded. I mean, often, when evidence is not accepted, it's either those who've generated it or the nature of evidence does not feel real or embedded enough. So embedding it deeply, if you're really looking at health systems or health services, creating more maybe ethnographic approaches, having mixed methodologies, but giving a feel that this is coming from contexts that are really real and felt realities, which whoever you're advocating with can associate and relate to. That is really important. And that comes from that interlocution that I was talking about. I think the third part of this is, especially for policymakers and our governments, if you're just going to highlight problems, it's not useful. So people want to hear solutions. Often the problems that you bring are known, are very, very well known. And the reason they remain problems is perhaps because the kind of the dinosaurs or the hierarchies that exist don't know how to move nimbly to change the systems. So what you really have to position is, imagine the evidence that you're creating has to be positioned within a system that needs to change. So you have to understand how this evidence will actually enable a set of decisions or a set of changes. And you have to kind of almost conceptualize and see where does your evidence fit in these set of decisions or changes that you're trying to influence. Which then brings me to the broader point is, you have to understand the political economy where you're creating evidence. Like, who is the user? What is the resistance? What are the challenges? Who are the allies? Where will the blocks happen? And often you're not the first person who's creating that evidence. There's been a history of evidence or generators of evidence, especially for sticky issues. So you have to relate to that history. Where are you coming in that history? Often we find researchers coming into that history as if they're the first ones to have unearthed or imagined that, which is not true, because that history is not owned only by researchers. That history is owned by movements, by people who've lived in those settings. So I think you have to kind of, again, it goes back to the same point, really understand where you are located within the ecosystem of where the issues you're exploring and the evidence that you're creating. Um, uh, I think that to me, accountability is a very kind of large word which needs to really be unpacked. Again, you can't just say accountability. You have to really think through who, what, for what purpose, what is their need? Have you really helped create evidence that fulfills this need? And the accountability has to be designed both externally but also internally, because there are systems and players and actors within systems that you're trying to change. So you have to understand that very well. Often for our work on health systems, I would say understanding the layers of the system, the politics of that is as important. I also feel that sometimes we create vocabulary with our evidence, which is too alternative. So we have to create vocabulary which is meaningful and easy for people to walk that journey with you. And on the other hand, sometimes that vocabulary gets co-opted. So you also have to be careful of that and constantly up the ante and constantly unravel that a little bit, so that danger of like women's empowerment or collectives, or I mean, I'm looking at Sejal and saying all this because she's done so much work on this and she has a lot of history on this. So, it's become very popular now to say that collectives work. And yet we know there are very instrumental ways in which we are looking at women's collectives, especially right now with COVID, leaning in on women, leaning on voluntarism of women and women health workers has become the way the system operates. So we have to figure out, is the evidence to say, oh my God, this is happening, and these are unquantified, unpaid workers? Because honestly, isn't there enough evidence of that? So what is it that we need to do next? Which brings me to the last point, which is really working in networks or collectives as researchers and program or advocates, so that what you're creating is building on where somebody else is left up and not creating another layer of evidence that is just redundant, because we already know that. What we don't know is how to operationalize it. So I think that's where the creativity, and honestly, that is the most challenging thing. How do you operationalize the evidence that you create? That is your creativity. Creativity doesn't mean having a multimedia tweetathon. Creativity means, how do you really utilize this? Who's going to use it? How will you make it meaningful? In what language? How do you bring those communities together? And the last thing I want to say, it's very, it's also become very popular to say, bring the evidence back to those poor women in the community. Well, no, bring the evidence back to the policymaker, bring it back to the people who are going to make the action happen. So it's at every level, we're responsible to bring that discussion back to those who we need to influence to bring about the shifts that we want to. That's it.
Thank you so much, Priya. That was really, really insightful. And it really gives me a segue to sort of introduce the sub theme. And as I mentioned in the beginning, that we, as you rightly pointed out, there are different levels at which we need to think about communicating evidence. So, be it with the actual policymakers, be it with the people who are working on the ground and actually working to make that change happen, or the community itself, which is a very dynamic and evolving space. So, to on that note, I really wanted to wanted some of our parents to reflect on how do they work with communities, not only in terms of bringing evidence back to them, but also involve them in the evidence making and in the change making. Because many of our a lot of our research also tries to build into its very design a participatory approach in which the people with whom we are conducting research become the actual voices of those changes. So, on that note, I will invite first Dalia to speak a little bit from her experience of working on various kinds of projects. So, Dalia, over to you. And I'm going to request every participant to please speak for about 5 minutes, maximum 5 to 6 minutes, so that we can come back for a second round and take in also a lot of the audience questions. And because Priya will be leaving us at around 5:45, if any of the participants have specific questions for Priya, please put them in the chat. And Priya, if you could just also respond to them in the chat if you feel like. Thank you so much. Over to you,
Yeah,
Dr.
yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Nilanchana. And it was really nice to setting the context. And thanks to Priya for her insightful discussions on importance of looking at the strategies and operationalization of sharing the evidences at community levels with the different stakeholders. So based on the experiences at ICRW engaging with the different projects, I'll be mainly sharing about few experiences of sharing back the evidences to the community and what precautions we have taken it and what is our learnings. And also not only engaging like them only to like get the information or share it back, but again engaging from a different phases of the project. So many times like if the researchers has a confusion with whom we need to share the findings. Is it only the study participant at particular points where the study participants are minors? So we need to also share it with the community stakeholders. So in one of our programs with adolescent boys and girls in schools, setting to address the issue of gender-based violence, we have disseminated the baseline findings with the teachers and the principals of the school. So that experience shows that it also helps the community stakeholders to reflect their own behaviors or their own perceptions when unless and until we shared the data, like that was the experience that they never considered. Even the boys experience gender-based violence in schools. So when the baseline data shows the adolescent boys reported more severe physical punishment than the girls for the same mistakes. So the teachers were reflecting and thinking about their own perceptions. Okay, so this also helps them to work forward, like how to address these issues at their own level. So another important point when we communicated with the findings of the studies with the community is like that sometimes only sharing the data without explaining the nuances or the situation, how it can be coming, can create some challenges as well. So if I'll talk about the same project, like after the baseline finding shared and the program started, the teachers were really like working towards to address the issue, and they were like looking forward for the midline finding, like how it comes. But when the midline finding comes, the reporting of the violence increased. So we will stop it. So it is important for the researcher when they are sharing the findings with the community to explain why and the nuances of the data which we are sharing it. Otherwise, it can sometimes demoralize the community. Okay, even after working that, it has increased. So it was like the discussion leads and the teachers were able to understand it is it is because of the scenario starts changing and there is an increase in the recognition of the issue among the students. It's not always the incidence of the violence has increased. So another important point which we need to ensure while sharing the findings with the community is how we should disseminate the findings with the community. So many times what we prepare for the donor or the larger community, like the larger audience, is little bit of highly technical terms and all things that needs to be like addressed, and the result should be understandable to a layman's language. So one of the project, we shared the findings of the impact evaluation of the program with the community. So after putting it into certain situations and like cutting it into the presentations or the videos which shows the thing. So again, like, you know, the medium of communicating. So if we work with a minority or the sensitive issues like gender-based violence in a particular community, we should be really conscious about disseminating the findings in the community level. It should not stigmatize them or like create a insecurity to the people. Like, okay, so we are as a part of the problem. So one of our project which is conducted in Rajasthan, so we didn't disseminate it at the baseline findings because that was working on the issue of violence. But after the end line, when we disseminate it through media, so that shows the progress. So there are certain things when we disseminate back the findings with the community, we need to be really careful. Then talking about like how it importance of engaging the community in different phases of the research and the program. So I'll take the example of our project in Gujarat, which we worked with the women collectives. That is one of the pioneering project to address the issue of public space safety in the rural settings, and closely engaging with the women collectives and the local governance system, the Gram Panchayat. So we actively engage the women collectives to conduct the safety audit and share the findings with the local governance, the Gram Panchayat members, by these women collective leaders. So that really helps to get the responses even from the Gram Panchayat level. So their own community people, after conducting a systematic study or an activity of a safety audit and sharing, these are some of the areas where they feel unsafe because of the particular reason. So that really helps the researcher, like, to understand more nuances and the local context of the issue when we really engage with the community level people at every phase of the problem. So I'm really happy that, like, engaging the women collective leaders on this safety audits, and they themselves representing their issue to the local governance system. So in 40% of the panchayats where we worked, they have utilize some of their untied funds to clear the areas which is marked as unsafe by the women in the community, to make it safe for the women and ensure the public space safety. One of other project, like we are less working on that. That is the project. It's a complete research. So we are engaging the youth advisory group. It's adolescent girls who are part of the initial program. This is a midterm evaluation of a program after 5 years of the program, how the results are sustained, or how the changes has been seen in the community. So we are engaging. This is in the process. So our plan is to engage them in the research, developing the research tools, interpretation of the data in the context, and disseminating the findings at the local community. So it's not only like this will help them to be, like, they are not only part of a research or like a just participating only. It also give them a confidence of that intellectual ownership and accountability of the program, and that really helps to sustain the efforts what we are doing through our programs and communicating widely it into the larger society. This is what the initial thoughts which I have. So if anything specific, then definitely I can come back. I hope I didn't exceed my time.
No, thank you, Dalia. That was really a very interesting discussion, and we'll definitely. I'm sure there's going to be questions, and we'll come back to you again during the question answer round. Um, Carrying on that note, I'd like to invite Yogesh ji. Yogesh ji has had an enormous experience, working with communities, conducting research with communities. And yesterday only, when I was talking to Yogesh ji, he was sharing with me how this sharing is not just a process of, communicating back, but also building, evidence at another level. So it is also a continuous process, and how change can happen through that sharing also. तो योगेश जी, मैं आपको इनवाइट करती हूँ, आप अपना बात यहाँ पे अगर थोड़ा सा 5-6 मिनट आप अपना अनुभव को आप सबके साथ शेयर करें, एंड मैं लास्ट में थोड़ा बहुत आपकी बात को मैं ट्रांसलेट कर दूंगी उन सबके लिए जो हिंदी हो सकता है नहीं समझते हो. थैंक यू योगेश जी so much.
थैंक यू नीलांजना. इट्स माय प्रिविलेज टू बी हियर. जो पहले प्रिया जी ने जितना बात किया और जो मुख्य बिंदु रखे वो बहुत ही जरूरी थे, और खास क्वेश्चन जो था कि वो कैसे एविडेंस को यूटिलाइज किया जा सकता है। एंड अभी जो डालिया ने जितना चर्चा किया अलग अलग प्रोग्राम को लेके, और जैसे क्या जरूरत है, कितना इम्पोर्टेंट है कि लोगों को जो पार्टिसिपेंट है उनको उसका हिस्सा बनाना। तो मैं अपने दो एग्जाम्पल से शुरू करता हूँ अपनी बातचीत की। एक तो हम लोग चूंकि लंबे समय से काम करें, पिछले 17-18 साल हो गए विकल्प ऑर्गेनाइजेशन को, उसके पहले भी जो मैंने काम किया उसके अंदर अलग अलग वक्त पर जब कभी रिसर्चर आते हैं और वो अपने प्रोग्राम को या अपनी स्टडी को करने के लिए बात करना शुरू करते हैं, तो कभी कभी मेरा व्यक्तिगत राय है कि आप एक ठगे से रह जाते हैं, है ना। आप मतलब आपको एक प्रकार ये बहुत ही सेल्फिश प्रोसेस जैसा है। कभी कोई आया आपके ग्रुप, आपके फील्ड में, आपके पास, आपसे बहुत सारी बात की, आपसे जानकारी लिया और चले गए, तो आपको नहीं पता कि उस वो जो भी जानकारी, जो भी नॉलेज वहां से इकट्ठा हुआ, उस पर क्या क्या बना, क्या बिल्ट हुआ, और वो किस तरीके से कम्युनिटी में बदलाव लाने में कोई मददगार साबित होता है। तो ऐसा कई बार होता रहा। और इसी दौरान मैंने अपना जो काम था, मैंने मीडिया में अलग अलग जगह पे कुछ कुछ काम किया। मेरी थोड़ी समझ बनी कि कैसे, कितनी इंपॉर्टेंट है अपनी बातों को फिर से लोगों तक लेके जाने में। सो मैं एक ऑर्गेनाइजेशन के साथ काम करता था जहां पर आदिवासियों के जीवन से जुड़े बहुत सारे मुद्दे पर काम हो रहा था, खास करके वहां पर उनके कर्जों से संबंधित, यानी कि अलग अलग उनके जेवर रख के या उनकी जमीन रख के या उनका घर वो गिरवी रख के, यदि जो भी पैसा वो उधार लेते थे, और उससे उनकी जिंदगी में कैसा बदलाव आया। और दूसरा था कि लाइवलीहुड के कुछ प्रयोग उस ऑर्गेनाइजेशन ने किए और उससे उनकी जिंदगी में क्या बदलाव आया, इस पर कुछ स्टडी, रिसर्च, कुछ पेपर्स लिखे गए। पर वो सभी, जैसे मेरे पीछे आप कबर्ड देख रहे हैं, इस तरह से भरा हुआ मटेरियल हमेशा रहा, वो कभी लौट के नहीं जा रहा था। तो मैंने वो प्रयोग किया मेरे पुराने अनुभव से कि मैं उन स्टडीज को पढ़ा और बहुत ही सरल भाषा में जो वो वापस वही पार्टिसिपेंट समझ सके, तो मैंने उनको किया। उस वक्त मुझे नहीं पता था कि इसको क्या बोलते हैं, बाद में मुझे पता चला कि इसको मोनोग्राफ बोलते हैं। और तो वो बहुत ही सरल भाषा में जो लोग उस स्टडी का हिस्सा बने उनके पास ले जाकर शेयर करने के लायक उसको बनाया। लेकिन जब ओवर द पीरियड मुझे ये भी समझ में आया कि मैं जो शब्द लिख रहा हूँ, जो हिंदी भी लिख रहा हूँ, वो भी शायद बहुत सारे आदिवासी साथियों को समझ में आने में थोड़ी मुश्किल है। तो फिर हमने आइडिया निकाला है कि हमने उन पर, उन्हीं लोगों से के साथ मिलकर कॉमिक्स वर्कशॉप किया, और कॉमिक्स वो जो डेटा था जो वहां से निकला हुआ, जो उनके सामने रखा और उसको कॉमिक्स फॉर्म में कन्वर्ट किया, और वो फिर उस कम्युनिटी में गया। एंड आप विश्वास करेंगे इतना तगड़ा उसका इम्पैक्ट हुआ कि कुछ ही महीनों में जितने लोगों का कर्जा, कुछ साहूकार लोगों ने, यानी कि कुछ लोग जो होते हैं जो पैसा लेन देन करने के लिए पैसा देते हैं, उन लोगों के लिए एक पूरा मूवमेंट खड़ा हुआ उनके खिलाफ। आदिवासी लोगों ने अपने जेवर, जमीन और घर वहां से छुड़वाए, और उन्होंने कानून की समझ भी बनाई कि कैसे ये कर्ज का कानून का। तो मेरा कहने का मतलब, कैसे आप कोई डेटा जनरेट करते हैं, कोई एविडेंस क्रिएट करते हैं और वो वापस भी कम्युनिटी में जाता है, तो कितना एम्पावरिंग है, किस तरीके से उनके अंदर वो क्षमताएं को विकास करता है, उनकी वॉइस रेस करने में, और एक पूरा आमूलचूल परिवर्तन या बुनियादी चेंज लाने में मदद करता है। दूसरा मेरा प्रयोग था कि इतने सालों के बाद हम लोग अलग अलग स्टडीज करते रहे, हमेशा हमने कोशिश किया कि उनको हिस्सा बनाएं। पीसीपीएनडीटी एक्ट को लेके हम लोगों ने बहुत सारे सर्वे, रिसर्च किया था, और हमने डॉक्टर्स और सोनोग्राफी मशीन और इन सब अल्ट्रासाउंड मशीन के लोगों, एडमिनिस्ट्रेटर को शामिल किया। और फिर हमने, क्योंकि ये मेरी समझ बनी थी कि कैसे वापस डेटा को लेके जाने का, चुपचाप आगे लेके जाना नहीं होता है, तो वापस उन्हीं सब लोगों को इकट्ठा किया, उनके साथ वो डेटा शेयर किया। बहुत इसमें बहुत चुनौती तो रही, क्योंकि बहुत लड़ाई झगड़े होते थे, बहुत सारी बातें होती थी उसके अंदर। कई बार वो हम पर मतलब अलग अलग तरीके के थ्रेट करने की बात करते थे। पर चूंकि जिस तरीके का तरीका था उनके सामने वो डेटा को रखने का, हमने कहा कि हमारा मकसद आप लोगों को हर्ट करना नहीं है, हमारा मकसद है कि इस पूरी बुनियादी व्यवस्था में बदलाव लाना। इसलिए हमने पूरी ईमानदारी से डेटा आपके सामने रखा। और तीसरा था कि अभी जो हमने यंग मैरिड गर्ल के साथ हमने जो भी रिसर्च किया, तो जैसा अभी प्रिया जी कह रही थी कि कितना जरूरी है, वहीं से लेके, और डालिया भी बता रही कि क्या जरूरी है कि शुरुआत से ही उनका हिस्सा बनाए। तो हम लोगों ने जब रिसर्च शुरू किया, तभी हम लोगों ने वहां के वॉलंटियर और कुछ यंग मैरिड गर्ल को उसका हिस्सा बनाया, उसकी डिजाइन में ही। शुरू में कुछ सर्वे किया, फिर वापस वो क्वेश्चनर बनाया, फिर उनके साथ शेयर किया, और फिर वो लोगों ने खुद ने वो एविडेंस को क्रिएट करने में मदद किया। एविडेंस को हम लोगों ने कंप्यूटर पे डाला और फिर उनके साथ वापस शेयर किया कि उसके विश्लेषण, उसकी एनालिसिस करने में उनकी हिस्सेदारी की। इस पूरे प्रोसेस से हमको बहुत बड़ा फायदा ये हुआ कि एक तो उनके अंदर बहुत बड़ा ट्रस्ट खड़ा हुआ, क्योंकि ये बहुत ही संवेदनशील मुद्दा था कि उनकी हिंसा, उनकी रिप्रोडक्टिव हेल्थ, उनकी इकोनॉमिक कंडीशन, उनके निर्णय लेने की क्षमता, उन पर जो प्रेशर आते हैं, उन पर तरह तरह की उनके इशू पर बात की थी, लेकिन उनको वो रखने का सेफ स्पेस क्रिएट हुआ, उनका ट्रस्ट बिल्ड हुआ। जो लोग जाके सवाल करते हैं उनके प्रति उनकी बहुत ट्रस्ट मतलब खड़ा हुआ। और फिर हमने जब वो रिपोर्ट तैयार हो गई तो हमको फिर से उसको सरल भाषा में करके किया, लेकिन हमको लगा वो रिपोर्ट तो बहुत ही बल्कि है, 120 पेज की रिपोर्ट है, वापस उनके साथ जाना और उनको पढ़ना बड़ा मुश्किल था। तो हम लोगों ने एक आइडिया निकाली कि छोटी छोटी वर्कशॉप की, गांव स्तर पर, पंचायत स्तर पर, और उन्हीं लोगों के साथ जो पार्टिसिपेंट्स रही, यानी कि 300 यंग मैरिड गर्ल जो थी, उनके साथ छोटे छोटे हिस्सों में 15, 18, 20 के ग्रुप में वो वापस एविडेंस उनके सामने रखे, उनके साथ बातचीत किया। उसकी बड़ी बात तो ये हुई कि उन्होंने स्लोली, उस वक्त जब हम रिसर्च कर रहे थे, उस वक्त जो इश्यूज को ढूंढ रहे थे, इतना अच्छा हमारा रपट था, उसके बावजूद बहुत सारे इशू उन्होंने छुपाए, नहीं बताए। लेकिन जब हम वर्कशॉप में वापस गए तो हमको अलग 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 इशू, यानी कि उसकी परतें जो है, डायमेंशंस हैं, वो हमको समझ में आए उस मुद्दे की, और उनके साथ काम करना आसान हुआ। तो यानी कि वो एम्पावर हुए, एट द सेम टाइम हमको नए आइडियाज आए उनके साथ काम करने के लिए। सो ये दूसरा बड़ा हुआ। 300 यंग मैरिड गर्ल अभी 700 प्लस में पहुंच गई है, जिनके साथ बहुत बड़ा ग्रुप अभी काम कर रहा है, और बहुत अलग अलग तरीके के इशू थे जिसके साथ था। एक और हमने आइडिया निकाला जिसके अंदर खासकर एंगेजिंग मेन वाला जो मामला था, जो कि हमारी समझ थी कि बहुत जरूरी है, तो लड़कों को जोड़ा और उनके साथ जो डेटा निकला उन्होंने फिर हमने उनके साथ जोड़ा। तो डेटा जैसे ऐसे थे कि कुछ कुछ डेटा के अंदर उन्होंने, उन लोगों ने हमको बताया कि वो लोग लगभग 82% से ज्यादा ऐसे लोग हैं जो समानता में विश्वास करते हैं, लेकिन उसके अंदर 94% वो लोग हैं जो ये कहते हैं कि कभी कभी मारपीट जरूरी है उनके लिए, वो ऐसी हरकतें करती है। और लगभग 92% लोगों ने ये बताया, लड़कों ने बताया कि वो अपने अनुसार पैसा नहीं खर्च कर सकते। तो इस तरीके के बहुत सारे डेटा थे, तो उनके सामने जब रखा तो उनको खुद को एक रिफ्लेक्शन का बहुत बड़ा मौका मिला, और फिर से वो एक स्ट्रॉन्ग चेंज मेकर बने और एक कम्युनिटी बदलाव के अंदर वो लोगों की भागीदारी बढ़ना शुरू हुई। सो ये अलग अलग तरीके के हमारे प्रयोग रहे। तो मेरी समझ ये बनती है कि एक, मेरी निगाह में एक प्रभावी रिसर्चर होने का मतलब ये है कि वो एंश्योर करे कि उसका एविडेंस, उसका डेटा फिर से कम्युनिटी के पास जाए, लोगों के हाथ में रहे, उनकी पहुंच में रहे, और वो उसको यूज कर सके, उस भाषा में कन्वर्ट करने के लिए वो मदद करे। सो ये मेरी बड़ी समझ बनी। तीसरी समझ मेरी ये बनी कि फंडर और डोनर भी जो आते हैं अपने साथ में, जो ये मदद करते हैं अपने को अलग अलग रिसर्च और वो सब करने में, वो भी इंश्योर करे कि ये रिसर्च जो हो रही है वो फिर से कम्युनिटी के साथ कैसे जा सके, वो एविडेंस वो उनके सशक्तिकरण का हिस्सा कैसे बने, वो एविडेंस उनकी ऐसी टूल बने जो उनकी वॉइस रेस करने में मदद कर सके। तो ये अलग अलग तरीके के अनुभव है। मैं इस जगह पे अपनी बात रोकता हूँ कि कुछ उदाहरण और है, तो जब अगली चर्चा होगी तो अपन उसके साथ बात करेंगे। और बहुत ही मजेदार मेरी यात्राएं रही है, शायद अलग अलग जगह पे शेयर करने में मजा आएगा। थैंक यू सो मच।
Thank you, Yogesh. That was amazing. So, for those who do not understand Hindi, I'm going to give a very brief translation. I will not be able to capture the entire gamut of Yogesh's experience, but Yogesh was basically sharing about his own work and how sharing the research with the participants and also making the community a part of the entire research process has led to not only empowerment of the community and change within the community, but it also but has also led to an enrichment of the research process itself. So, for example, he shared about a research with Adivasi people in a particular context, where the research was looking at the impact of loans and indebtedness through, informal money lending by certain informal money lenders. And the research tried to find out what was the impact, and the research also tried to find out what is the impact of livelihood. And when this research was actually shared with the community in through a certain kind of a monograph, in a language that was easily understood by the community. So not just a bulky report of 120 pages, but small monograph with the main points. It was shared back to the community through workshops, etc. The women actually understood the major problems and or more, I mean, I think they have always understood, but the articulation of that and the common experiences across so many people in that region actually helped to bring together a huge movement against informal money lenders. He also shared experiences of working with young married girls and also working with men. And he suggested that, like different methods that were used. For example, he talked about a research process with these young married girls where basically the girls became volunteers in the whole research process. They were part of the research design, they were part of the research collection, they were part of the initial analysis process. And all of this actually helped to strengthen the research and also create a greater sense of, coming together and empowerment within the community. And Yogesh said that, they also conducted sort of a comic book workshop, and all of this helped to communicate these issues back with the community, and also through small workshops with these different stakeholders, like maybe groups of 15 17 people in each small localities. This helped to create a larger awareness of the kinds of issues that young adolescent girls were facing or young women were facing, the kind of violence they were experiencing in their everyday lives. And in fact, during this sharing, a lot of things that had not come up during the initial phase of data collection also came up. And this helped to strengthen the whole evidence making and the whole evidence building. Similarly, in the context of a research with young men, initially, in fact, these men were also part of the whole research process. And initially, when the research was happening, many of the men said, 100% of the men said that we are all for gender equality. But when certain questions were asked as to, where is wife beating okay, then many people said, okay, if the wife goes out of hand or does something that is completely unacceptable, she has to be beaten. And these kinds of when this research was shared back with all these young men in the community, they themselves understood the discrepancies and the differences between, say their belief in gender equality and the other views that they were holding. And this helped to bring together, a greater awareness and a greater sort of discussion among them, which enabled the movement of the community itself on a path to change. So I will stop here. I'm sorry I've not been able to represent the entire set of things that you shared. And but I hope I was able to bring out some of the very key examples and how influential research needs to actually continuously engage with the community in a very dynamic way and look at research products in such a way that they are able to communicate to the end user. So I will, with those words,
Thank you
I
so
will
much.
move. Thank you,
Thank you.
Yogesh. With those words, I'll move to Sneha Sharma. Sneha, as I've already mentioned, is our colleague at ICRW, and Sneha has a very rich experience of different kinds of evidence making and evidence communication. Sneha, over to you, and 5 minutes, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Nilanjana. And thank you for bringing this topic, which I think is very pertinent. And a lot of our speakers have already touched upon a lot of things. But I am coming here from a very researcher perspective. Um, so, uh, we as researchers often get carried away with the need of producing knowledge uh, that is more suitable for, say, a global publication or a donor report or research reports and so on. Then there is, of course, the pressure of time, then the need to share with our peer organizations or organizations doing similar work. And then we generally tend to sort of club our audiences for all these products. Like there are multiple audiences with different needs, but we generally tend to club our audiences. And while doing all this, we also grapple with the question of how can we share our evidence back with the community, because they are generally the first point of contact for all our primary research. And of course, we would want the findings to be utilized for them at large. So just going by an example from a research study that was recently completed on adolescent empowerment. So as part of our research, we were looking at several organizations that were working on working with adolescents, utilizing strategies for adolescent empowerment. The aim of the research was to consolidate these strategies and come up with a consolidated programming for adolescent empowerment. So our conversations with the staff working at the front line, or the field staff, and even adolescents, both boys and girls, made us realize that there is a huge gap in how we are going to use this knowledge, how we are going to produce the evidence, and how it will reach back to them. There is of course there is a distance between the time also, like we collect data at a different point in time, then there are a few months between how this sharing happens back to them. So even if there are actionable points that could sort of be used for the community, because of the time lag, it is hardly possible to implement them. Then of course there is a distance in our own positionality as well. So the language that we use, or the way that we want to produce our evidence, is generally very far off from how it can be used in the communities. It is generally uh, in a way that it's not easy to break it down into more actionable and implementable points. So just to mitigate this gap, there are there are ways that we can do it. We can produce visuals, we can produce comic book, we can produce storybooks, which could be used for our intended audience. So in our experience, we developed a story for change toolkit, which utilized illustrated stories that were highlighting some key strategies that came as our findings from the research. So these stories were based on real life narratives of our field participants, but we edited a lot of the stories and made it more fictional. And then so the stories generally flow like there is a protagonist, there are some issues that adolescent girls face, which generally how they share in our interactions. Then using the whole story, we interweaved the strategies for empowerment between the stories. And the aim was that if facilitators, or even if girls are able to access these stories, they can see how a strategy for empowerment can play out in real life. What happens when such a strategy is implemented by an organization? What are some of the things that happen after that? What are some of the changes that girls could go through? So the whole Stories for Change presents that. That was one of the ways that we thought we could have real time sharing with the community. But while doing this, of course, there were a lot of challenges. We generally want to overload our products with a lot of information, with a lot of findings, which might not be suitable in such products. So I have an example from one of the films that we made. So this film was also part of the same project, and it was on adolescent empowerment. During the scripting process, all of us from the team, we wanted a lot of nuanced findings in the film script. We wanted a lot of strategies to be represented in the film. So there was a lot of I mean, by overloading it, we made it a lot more confusing and a lot more muddled. So defeating the whole purpose of simplifying a language and simplifying the way we communicate with the communities. So the whole experience of working with the filmmakers, who then of course tried to make us understand that it's better that we have just some aspects or just some strategies which would make the film clearer, and will also sort of give us space to unpack those strategies in a much more nuanced manner, which might not be possible if you try to overload it, if you try to cover everything in one product. So that just shows that how we need to understand our audience. We need to understand what is the messaging that we want to give out. in such products or in such innovative products or creative products that we want to call, and how are they eventually going to be used by the community. So that sort of process needs to be very clear from the beginning. Another thing that I want to highlight here is where we are lagging, which I feel is that um, we still lag a lot around making multilingual products. Most of us, I mean, we generally don't have scope, we don't have bandwidth, we don't have time, and then we tend to prioritize using a universal language, which generally becomes English for us. With that, we of course create a distance between us and and when we want to share the evidence back. So that distance that further creates a distance between us and between the knowledge and plus the sharing back of knowledge. So I mean, we are trying to sort of incorporate this in our research from now on, but it is still something that we grapple with. Another challenge that we faced while making such products is that uh, as researchers or we as organizations, as ICRW, we are not really involved in the community or implementing a lot of our projects. So there is already a distance between us creating evidence and how this evidence is going to be utilized. So while we do make a lot of these toolkits or guides or booklets that we want the communities to use or organizations to implement them, but since there is already a distance and there is already a sort of distance among between us, it becomes very important that along with this we also have very clear steps or guides in how to use these uh, products or these innovative and interactive products. Like we need very clear communication along with these products so that whosoever is using this, um, we can avoid diluting of messages, we can avoid strengthening, we can avoid weakening of the messages that we are trying to say in this. Like there is, of course, because of that distance, we don't want oversimplification of our messaging. We don't want that the nuanced findings that we base or ground in our literature, we don't want that to be oversimplified or communicated in a very different manner. So there is a need for us to realize that along with our interactive products, we have to build guides, we have to build some sort of transferability tools that can be used by people, that can be used by implementing organization or practitioners. So that was around how communities can use it, and just that's it from my side for now. But in case there are any questions, I can take that later.
Thank you so much, Sneha. Really sorry for rushing all of you, but I do hope that yes, people are also writing in the chat boxes, and please feel free to respond on the chat, and we hope to be able to take a round of audience questions as well. So quickly moving over to the next issue, and as we introduced in the beginning itself, and as many of you have also said, that there are different levels at which we need to communicate and communicate in an effective way. So we have been talking so far about how do we engage with the community in the making of that research and in the sharing of that research. But another very important group of people that we need to engage with is actually our peer organizations, activist groups, etc., who are working on the ground, or partner organizations. And how do we really work together to build that knowledge and to share that knowledge so that we are able to ultimately, effect change. And as Priya had mentioned, that we are not starting in a vacuum. So there are a range of organizations that are already working, and how do we sort of work with each other to strengthen that evidence and strengthen the voices of change. Yeah, over to you, Purika.
Thank you, Nilanjana. Hi everyone, thank you for joining in. It's actually very heartening to hear so many experiences and so many enriching experiences. So I'm just going to add a very little small bit to this large discussion that we are having. And it's a maze. I mean, evidence creation and communication, both of it is a maze. So I'll just cover the aspect of two things. One is of collaboration with peer and research and program organizations, and another is format and language. A lot of the previous speakers spoke about language, bhasha, dialect, and how do we then transcend those boundaries and how do we communicate effectively. So just to begin a little bit around evidence, we all are generating some kind of data or evidence through our work, be it research organizations, be it implementation organizations, evaluations, or organizations doing advocacy. Everyone is doing something. So, but not everything is shared, not everything is available, and not everything is used for the purpose it was gathered for initially. Sometimes studies around similar thematics are conducted within the same district, same geographies, sometimes even the same village, but at different timings or a touch and go, and one doesn't realize what the other is doing. And unless all these conversations are anchored by the same donor, a lot of times we do not get to know what the other is doing. So the purpose of evidence collection for people may be different. I mean, it could be some need it for rapid inputs into their program design and need a dipstick sort of a study, a formative study in the beginning of the program. Some need it for to document the processes that go on in their research and implementation cycles, while some use it for evaluations, and also some of us also use it for developing exploring new variables and interlinkages between these variables. So, but a lot of this is happening in silos, and we realize much later that we are exploring the same concept sometimes, or exploring different but interlinked concepts. So within grant cycles that we all have, 2 years, 4 years, 5 years, of course, the longer ones have more space and time to engage, but the shorter ones, especially, it's not enough to collaborate at multiple levels right from the beginning and reach a point where all of us are engaged in a constructive, productive process. We do, however, try, and I know a lot of us try and form advisory groups, have a lot of quality assurance processes for our products that we come out with, engage our stakeholders at specific times as technical advisory groups, etc. But a much more in-depth engagement sometimes seems difficult to carry out. And it's also important because it does not just have a horizontal sort of a coverage, but also a very vertical, in-depth way in which people can engage with each other. And there is an interdisciplinary lens that you embed in all your research processes and get in different perspectives of people working either on similar domains or have a history of research, as Priya had started out that conversation. Uh, it just in the spirit of collaboration, I think it also enables building capacities of all kinds of organizations. We learn from grassroots organizations, they learn from us. I think that that exchange can be more thought out, more frequent, and more deliberate in the program design and during the duration of the project. uh, Another thing that I would then touch around is around what kind of data do research organizations want, and what is it that program organizations look for. And I'll take an example from a recent project of ICRW, Couple Engage, which was a design research project, and it was around family planning and engaging men in family planning. So we did an in-depth ethnographic study and in UP and Bihar, and we had a range of insights. While the research organizations and those deliberating on making frameworks and understanding the domain a little more welcomed the research insights hands-on, the program organizations constantly asked, but what is the next step? What are the solutions? How do you bridge that gap? How do you cross that bridge of research and programs? So I think actionable insights is something that all of us are looking for. We have problematized the problem enough, but the problem is also so dynamic that we keep going back to it to understand that what is the new aspect that it has forged or gone ahead with. And especially with COVID and the ways situation, the face of research, the lives of people, everything is changing. It becomes even more important to understand the problem yet all over again. So these were some of the aspects that I wanted to touch upon, and now deep diving into a little bit around language. So it's interesting. I know we spoke around Hindi and different regional languages vis-a-vis English. But again, another example from the same project that I would want to cite is that even English has different articulations, and we bring in our own articulation into whatever we write, we speak, we think. And when we do that, we sometimes complicate something really simple, something that can be communicated far more effectively in simpler words. And for instance, in family planning, it's very common to hear method switching, method discontinuation, why women or men do not take or discontinue certain methods. But we came up with a term called method experimentation. Now that has a completely different meaning, and some people may and have contested that is it an apt usage? Because many public health researchers have not used that term at all. So I just wanted to leave the group with some last questions, which I also think about and would want all of us to reflect on. Is this what we call being creative? Does creative become confusing? We have to constantly ask ourselves, are we communicating effectively? And how does creative communication ensure that it's effective as well? So I'll end with that and happy to take your questions in the next round.
Thank you so much, Kohika. That was really a very interesting perspective, and thank you for leaving us with these questions. And I hope we'll have time to get back to some of these. I will move quickly on to Pranita, and I'm being very mindful of the time. Uh, uh, so you see, as we said, that sometimes this communicating evidence is not is also very, it's sometimes very important to balance two kinds of communication. One is communicating with the community, communicating with our peers, and also communicating evidence with a lot of policymakers, especially at the subnational level. So a lot of our work is also with state governments, also in districts, and how do we actually work with administrators and government at the district level, at the state level, and communicate our evidence in ways that they can make use of. So over to you, Pranita. Thank you.
Thank you, Nilanjana. And I must say there's been a lot of very enriching reflection and experiences sharing, a lot of food for thought for all of us. I'll try to cover the question that you raised with best of my ability and experience. But before sharing specific experiences, I want to highlight some of the core values that I personally believe in terms of evidence generation and communication. And in that, the first is being cognizant of our own personal biases. So like our own way of looking people, society, situation, that really influence the way we understand what other person is telling us. So that becomes extremely important for me to be very cognizant of. And that happens very often when we not only like while data collection, but also when we are doing the analysis. It becomes quite tempting to pick up narratives that are aligned with our own thoughts and hypotheses, while ignoring divergent view or experiences. So that is one thing that is very important and crucial for me to consider. Another is being explicit about uncertainty and unknowns. And I suppose that this is true for all the time, particularly more when we are dealing with a new dynamic situation. Um, because when we are communicating our research or evaluation findings, we want to be certain, we want to say the things we are sure about. But I think it's also important to bring out the things which are uncertain, we are uncertain about, the things which are not really we are not fully aware of, the things which are unknown. So it's more about, like, being truthful in what we know and what we don't know. The third important piece is being respectful to varied ways of knowing and knowledge creation. um, we often tie ourselves in terms of hierarchy, hierarchy of methods and methodology, in terms of accepting something as legit knowledge while ignoring others. So that's also we need to be careful about, as to what we are considering as knowledge and what we are saying it's not. I think many of our speakers have already talked about making evidence available to everyone who matters, and that includes first and foremost the participants who have opened up their life experiences, enriching others, creating building blocks of evidence. So they definitely have first right on the evidence and knowledge creation, knowledge that they have contributed in creating. So making it accessible, in terms of language, in terms of presentation, in terms of articulation, that becomes extremely important. Honestly, I find these quite difficult. None of these are easy to deal with, but I think these are important points to be considered and mindful of. And I'll just take just quick couple of examples. So a few years back, when we were developing a school-based program on violence prevention, GEMS program, what Nilanjana mentioned earlier, we felt that we don't really know enough how young girls and boys understand and express gender relations, power dynamics, their experiences and expression of gender-based violence. Even there were questions if young people, young adolescents really understand these complex constructs. And the thing was that we were surprised, but it was also some level of ignorance at our level, that the fact is young people do understand, young people do express their understanding with the whole the with all its complexity. It is really crucial for us, for researchers or the people who are engaged in knowledge creation and generation, to really understand that in the best possible way, in the best possible, in the context in which it is being said. So being open, being having that ability within the researchers becomes very crucial to understand. And in that process, we learn that with in discussion with young leaders and young girls and boys, we designed the whole formative research and really understood, explored those questions, and also validated our own interpretation with theirs. And that collective learning and engagement led to the whole GEMS program. The biggest learning from that whole exercise is the need for being open, to bring ourselves to in that space and in that context, to really understand those experiences and their life experiences. What really led to that initial first step to the next was that those young boys and girls not only shared their experiences, but also become very integral part of the analysis process, identifying key themes from the formative research, designing the campaign, developing multiple activities like games, posters, and different interesting things to and use those to really communicate and engage with their parents and teachers on the issues which in general we consider quite complex and really difficult to communicate. So that was extremely crucial. In that whole journey, the one thing which was very stark and and clear that there is a lot of power dynamics that exist in the ecosystem of evidence creation and communication. What is acceptable or not acceptable in what, not only in terms of what is being communicated, but also how it's being communicated and who is communicating that. And in that, you know, that really came out also very clearly when we were engaging with teachers and government officials, especially on the evidence around prevalence of violence in school. In I mean, all of you are aware that, Right to Education Act prohibits corporal punishment, but on the other side, we really see a lot of violence happens. But in a public, like, in an event type setting, for teachers to acknowledge and accept and engage in the process of addressing it is extremely difficult in that sense. And in fact, when we were working on that, we were also very concerned as to whether it will really work or not work, whether they will accept it or not. And uh, the the space, having that space where they could associate the findings with their life experiences, with the realities of ground, that really helped establish that relationship where teachers not only acknowledge that yes, these are the issues, but also part of the whole process of change makers, which was extremely crucial for us. And they become then the internal advocate within the system to promote the issue of, or really highlight the issue of gender inequality and discrimination, and the need to work on that. So I'll just pause on that, and over to you, Nilanjana, and hope to have some more discussion subsequently. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Pranita. That was wonderful and a lot of food for thought. And it's such a rich experience. I think all of us are gaining from this. I will now move to the very sticky and difficult terrain of negotiating with policymakers at the national level, at the global level, and how do we actually translate the analysis that we do on the ground, and how do we translate this evidence that is created on the ground into advocacy I mean, translate it into advocacy, and how do we actually negotiate with governments, with policymakers, be it at the subnational, national, or global level. And I'd like to invite Sejal, who has really worked extensively. She's somebody who is constantly in touch with the ground, with the grassroots, as well as the policymakers. So who better than Sejal to give us some insights into how this works? Over to you, Sejal, and requesting you to talk for not more than 5 to 7 minutes. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I mean, I'm looking at the watch. I think great points have already been made. One of the key things that we found, I mean, I remember the first big research that motivated us was around the question, because the Supreme Court, there was a case that was put in 2001 on hunger, and they were looking at what is happening around the country to feed into evidence in the court. Now, classically, research, for me, one of the big ways to bring about change, which is the political action, is actually one is to look at policymakers, to look at elected representatives, to look at the courts and the law, and what can we do with the demand we are going, and what do we actually feed it from what we are seeing. But for women, one of the more immediate institutional um, forum where they actually have to negotiate and exercise choice is really the household and the community. So then we had, in this instance of hunger, actually, when we were collecting evidence and data to feed to the court, it was 2001, we had an earthquake, then we had a communal carnage, it got left out. But over the course of the 2 years, we understood that the community itself was not problematizing hunger. It was seen as a shame that there was hunger in the household, or there was no food in the household, is not something that people went out and said or organized around. The whole mindscape was this. So when we first decided, okay, we started to talking to other partners in Gujarat, other civil society organizations. That time, Right to Food was still new. The campaign was still just coming together as some of us started meeting across the country on this issue. And mm, we found that in Gujarat, there was so much resistance from policymakers, from our political leaders, from our civil society organizations that, this is about Odisha and Ethiopia, it's not about Gujarat. We are not talking about who it is, there's no hunger um, like that. It's in very few pockets. And hence we decided to look at a tool on how do we get the community. Let's see and explore what is this, how do we actually problematize hunger. And unless people see the scope and that it's not my individual problem, that was what motivated us. So I thought, in organizing, and if you're looking for change, you need, for us, it's always been more meaningful to look at what is it that we would like to change or the communities are trying to change, and to actually therefore then build evidence around it so that we can all collectively look at it. So our engagement with the communities begins much earlier. The other way where we have done research is if we are seeing something in records. In 2014, so on that hunger question, therefore we had to build a pictorial tool. It's a very sensitive issue. How are you going to discuss this? How are you going to collect evidence around this? And interestingly, we said, let's talk of seasonality, let's not talk of calorie intake. And this long questionnaire, as we, of course, did all the secondary study research, we worked with researchers and said, how do people measure hunger? What does the BPL line consist of? And we went through the various measures and we felt that none of this would make sense to ask as questions. So ultimately, what evolved is very deep dive participatory exercises on trying to get how do people articulate hunger. And using that terminology, we said, okay, let's build a pictorial tool on which there might be some mechanism. Because I think at the heart of every research, only the findings shouldn't make sense. For us, during the time you're collecting data, that is the time your questions itself should be useful to the person. You're not going to pay them, you're going to be a disclaimer. There's no incentive for the person to give you that time. And when you work with the most marginalized, and those are the people that you're actually, they are your respondents in your data, their time is most precious. So actually the tools and what sense they make out of as they respond to the questions, as they engage with the problem and they try to understand what is my own reality, that is the time you have, that half an hour or 2 hours, whatever exercise you're doing. And for us, that has been a huge investment, that every time we do a tool for deep diving, we really look at what is the respondent going to get out of it by engaging in this, on this with us. So that's one. I think we kind of miss the boat if we don't make it meaningful at that point itself. Then, of course, when you bring together the data, it's, we've had really funny experiments, but we've done roti chai parts and we've done uh, banners, and we've done this of bringing back data to the community. But the most effective probably have been platforms where policymakers and the communities come together. Now, this might be a Jansunwai, it might be a Jansamvad, it might be a large Mela, but we use these occasions where we triangulate this, where there's a testimony, which is a live qualitative data that talks of the person's experience. Often I was just writing to Mary on this hunger. I know that the Sangathan that was doing this was also deeply moved. Our civil society partners were shocked when they saw what people were telling them, because I think it is a tool which was really, really important on how people engage with it and tell you what they will tell. So just asking kitna khaya ya kya tumhara income hai, these are questions that don't give you results. And then it was a public hearings where people then owned the data and said, look, this is what we are seeing. And the shift that we were trying to establish was, how do people own the data to then negotiate with the state, negotiate citizenship, and see it as a right and not as charity. And those continue to be those continue to be conversations that we've had in many, many different ways. Just last year with the Right to Food campaign, we also find it useful to plug in with much larger studies, because we're not then developing all the tools, but we are adopting some of the tools in our context and how we'll deploy them and why are we doing this, and we'll add some questions. We might add a participatory exercise with it. We'll combine with an event on what will we do with this, what's the action that we'll do with it. So for us, building ownership or designing sensitive tools have been important. And lastly, I think press, media, feed it into legal action, feed it into policy bodies, feed it with action on the ground when actually people agitate and struggle. They also need evidence and data as they sit to negotiate for their demands. And therefore, localized data is so important to women. In the last data set on, there is this huge problem that we were seeing in tribal areas. Consent, women choosing a partner of their own choice was not a huge cultural issue. We started seeing these problems come to us on our helpline, and the Nyaya Samiti said we have several of these young girls who have come to us that they've been chased by their parents and they've been forcibly married. They're being, they're actually, what do you call, auctions happening where the girl is bought back and then auctioned to the. Now, that one or two cases made us go back and look at the police records in our area and said, okay, what is, and we saw abnormally high cases of rape and abduction. So we looked at all this FIR. So we did our evidence. So a lot of this data is not necessarily very far away. It is within your systems and files, and you have to dig at it. And we looked at it, and then we spoke to some of this. And what we did with the data is that research finding. The women said, okay, the young girl said, we want to have stakeholders consultations. So you be with us, because otherwise our parents, our community elders, the police, the PWDB officer, everybody together in a room where we say, okay, this is what we found from police records. So you can't deny it because it's not only us saying. And then the girls talked about what they're facing. The girls eventually said, we want to have a larger dialogue. And a couple of our team members, they made a short film. It's on our website. Whose choice is it anyway? Then a set of tools got made to it. So it's a live issue. Now then we did a roundtable in 2017, bringing together people who are working with young people. And we felt that nationally, we are looking at child marriage and early marriage as a problem, but we're not looking at consent. It's not age, but agency. Sometimes, all the partners of AJWS that is working on this theme, I think these are very catchy, and that's at the heart of communicating research. Because at the end of it, I've also worked on lobbying on several laws in Delhi, sitting for 10 years, and I know we have to make briefs which are like 2 paragraphs. What is your big research and evidence going to do? In the end, when you're talking to a policymaker, you get that much space and you get that much time to grab attention. So it might be a person's story, or you have to really get down to the heart of what are you trying to say, change, which Priya said very well. If you're working within the system, your ask from the campaign will be much higher of what is not going to, your ask is what is needed to be done, and it should aspire to dream much higher. The campaign is not going to be constrained by this, but research and evidence is looking for much smaller incremental changes, because we do have law and policy in India, but we don't have it translated on the ground. So most often the research is actually building evidence to translate this law and policy to the ground. And lastly, I think in organizing, basically change is about organizing and political organizing. That research and data of whoever participated in it should also empower them to negotiate better with their circumstances. Great if they're part of already a collective, then there is more spaces to have these discussions of what are we trying to change, and there are more voices saying the same things. But even in researches where we have gone, where people have been there, I think what we need to do much more is, and we've done that because we will ask, we have limited capacity, we can do this much, and then we'll work with researchers. Okay, you now help us postulate this or help us analyze data. Right now ICRW is with us trying to do something like that. The film Parvas that you did on adolescent empowerment strategies, we've talked about it, but that film has made much more impact on communicating what the program strategies are to the community and to the next set of workers. So it finds different resonances, but I think at the end of the day, research has to be meaningful from the time it is being designed. You need to know who is the stakeholder who is buying into what you're doing, at least for organizing and for this very immediate changes, and not mega level on 100 years. What am I trying to change? I'm not into that kind. I'm very, very functional researcher. So for me, that seems to have worked. At the end of it, we should all feel better for having engaged with it, more powerful, more knowing, more confident of saying what we are saying. And if it serves that purpose, I think the research has served its purpose, because ultimately it's individuals who will actually champion change. That's it
Thank
from me.
you. Thank you so much, Sejal. And we are nearly at the end of our time. So I'm going to quickly invite our last panelist, Sonia Tanaka, and request Sonia to reflect a little bit on how evidence can be shared with global and national policymakers in order to really influence change. If you can reflect a little bit on that. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Hard to follow, Sejal. That was so comprehensive and really fascinating. So hi, everyone. I am the coordinator at Global Health 50/50, and I'm happy to share a little bit about our experience in translating evidence into advocacy. And just as a quick background, kind of the example that I'm going to be touching on, we produce a report every year, and we look at the gender-related policies and practices of about 200 organizations, and they span the UN system, government aid agencies, NGOs, private sector, and these are the cohort of organizations that we've determined to be particularly influential in shaping global health. And from the start of our initiative, we've been really interested in how we can contribute to bridging these worlds of research and advocacy and policy change. And so there are just a few tactics that I wanted to share that we found to be particularly effective in driving policy change. And these are specific to the work that we do at the global level and with the organization as the subject of study. But I can certainly hear, from the past hour and a half, that it certainly aligns with a lot of what we heard from the speakers already. So firstly, kind of very similar to what we've heard about connecting with communities and participatory research. For us, connecting directly with the organizations we study has been really valuable. Our method of data collection includes a lot of direct engagement with organizations. We spend a lot of time, collecting the data ourselves based on what's in the public realm, but then we spend quite a bit of time with organizations to validate that data and to kind of open a conversation with them. And that partly relies on one, of course, the organization being willing to engage with us, but then two, that we are strategic in identifying who that person is inside of the organization, who's going to be open to these issues that we're bringing, who's going to be, not necessarily leadership level, but have access to decision making. And for us, then we can tap into their own personal incentives and being a part of, showing their own organization that they're an active part of promoting the good standing of their organization and promoting good positive change. And so there's a real partnership that we hope to foster, and that's this really valuable advocacy opportunity, because then we're contributing to a discussion that happens internally, and some self-reflection and self-examination on an organization's own policies and own culture that wasn't necessarily happening already. Two, we then collect a lot of data, and we translate that as much as possible into transparent and user-friendly data visualization tools. So all of the data that we generate, we know that it's only useful if it's presented in a simple way. And one way that we do that is our gender and health index, and we use a traffic light system. And we really like that for a couple of reasons. You know, it's very simple: red, amber, green. Organizations can see in a glance kind of how they're doing across a spectrum of variables that we collect on. And organizations themselves can see it, but so can the rest of the world. So can potential partners, potential funders, potential employees, you know, peers across the global health system. And which again creates that transparency creates an incentive for organizations to do better, and creates a healthy competition between organizations, which we've heard from a number of organizations is the case, and we find quite positive that organizations are then feeling kind of empowered with the tools that we're providing to push themselves and to push each other further along their journey towards being more gender responsive. 3, for us, it's connecting to the emotive as well. So, you know, I feel like we often run into obstacles for the simple reason that perhaps we're too academic in our approach, that this idea in our work that gender is a social construction, this concept can be a bit hard to grasp. And so, you know, one way that we address this issue is through our photo competition. And so we have a photo competition on gender, and in a way, you know, in ways that words can never do, these images depict this like diversity and beauty of gender and why gender matters in people's day-to-day lives. And so by complementing the data and the policy analysis we do with imagery and kind of the human experience and storytelling, we can be a lot more effective often in bringing people in who aren't necessarily experts in our field. Number 4, linking up with champions. Kind of one of our most visible and influential levers of our work in translating research into advocacy is our advisory council. And that's made up of a group of global leaders who are really forceful advocates on our part. And we work with them to take their findings into networks at that all different levels. They use our data in speaking engagements. They can bring our findings to other boards that they sit on. And that we're really indebted to this group of people because they bring a level of credibility and influence and access that we would never have on our own, and has been a really essential lever for us to generate impact. And then 5, we've been really experimenting around how we measure our own impact, which for an advocacy initiative is not always straightforward, and we're certainly learning a lot about what that looks like and how to do it better. For us, you know, for now we're just being as thorough as possible in tracking our outreach to governments, recording responses, tracking citations. And so with that kind of database and that tracking, we're able to, one, of course, report back to our funders, but we're also able to analyze our own efforts to see what's having an impact, what's not, and learn through kind of a feedback cycle with that information. So just quick wrap up for us. There's a number of advocacy and engagement considerations that we embed into our research and engagement design process from the beginning. And some of those questions are, you know, one, who is the research about? And can we share it directly with those interested actors? How do we get it in front of those actors? Do we get their attention on social media? Can we also tap into some existing incentives to encourage their engagement with us? 2, can we translate that research into something that's easier to consume? If that's case studies or interviews, web stories, infographics, that can be a lot more digestible than a big report. 3, what are the practical implications? And I know we've heard about this a lot today, but you know, what's the near-term change that we're trying to see? And is it feasible to expect in the different contexts and given the different challenges of actors that they face? So what tools and what recommendations can we provide to facilitate that change? 4, who has the power to make that change? You know, who in our network could be an effective champion, but also can we bring in you know, influential actors like funders who have the power to really affect system-wide change? across the global health system. And then finally, how can we measure the output of this, the impact of this output, and use that information to keep learning and keep improving our efforts to be better advocates. I'll stop there.
Thank you, Sonia. Sonia, it is a great presentation, and we learned so much continuously from each other. I want to say that this has been an absolutely enthralling set of discussions, and I'm really sorry, but we have actually run out of time, so it would be difficult to go back for a second round, which I would really have liked to. But I'm also very happy to see that, in the chat, our chat boxes have also been full of the discussions, and people have raised concerns, issues, shared their experiences, and all of you have been responding. So yes, there has been actually a proper discussion happening on the chat box, and I will request all the participants to also sort of share their further reflections over email, and we can always continue this conversation. I'm very tempted to say that let's continue the conversation over coffee, but unfortunately, we are in an online mode and we won't have the coffee table to right now move to. But yes, thank you so much, everyone. It has been an absolute pleasure. And I hope these conversations don't end here. We continue to share amongst ourselves. We continue to share what we're doing with our communities, with the communities that we are working with. And they are actually our pathfinders in many ways of how we are actually engaging with the government, how we can actually share with each other, support each other, and build together and not work in silos. I think that has been a very key point. And there's such a rich set of experiences out there. And thank you so much once more, everyone, for making the time to be here. Thank you very much. All of you who have come to attend this roundtable, and hope to see you again very, very soon. So with those words, thank you. And I close the roundtable now.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Thank you so much.